Chapter 12 Detroit. It took a while for the doctor's smug satisfaction and his burning anger to fade away. He had initially set a course back to Alcheron 5 colony, fully intent on stopping the newest catastrophe before it could take root. Hell, he'd go back to the Enterprise and seek Picard's help if he had to, for he had no doubt the starship captain wouldn't turn down the opportunity to save thousands of lives yet again. But as the hundreds and hundreds of plots and plans whirled around in the doctor's mind, a grain of something far less welcome began to wriggle its way in. The TARDIS had very nearly reached its destination when suddenly the doctor pulled her to a stop, leaving her in deep space a few dozen light years and a score of temporal years from its destination. Pragmatism had settled in because, put it simply, he knew there was no point. He could have stopped the asteroid, yes, he had no doubt of that. But this wasn't just some natural disaster to be avoided. This wasn't even a lone alien attack to be thwarted. This was a coordinated, concentrated effort of a group of beings capable of time travel, well, more or less, and determined to ensure history came to pass the way they intended. The resulting struggle could last, from the perspective of those fighting it, forever, and with both sides constantly changing time in a strategic battle waged in the shadows. Indeed, as much as the doctor hated to admit it, they had the advantage in such a situation. He couldn't risk crossing his own timeline too much, knowing the disaster that such a paradox would bring. But the future Starfleet had dozens, if not hundreds of time agents, all ready to go back and contribute to the destruction of the colony in a variety of exciting ways. It didn't matter how good you were at chess if the other player got to move 5 pieces every time you moved 1. And this wasn't an enemy he could simply cast out or destroy. They were humans, the future of mankind. And as much as he found their practices despicable, he could also see, very grudgingly, that where they were coming from. They would kill him if they had to end this. He didn't think he'd be able to do the same to them. So it didn't matter how many times he saved the colony. The Starfleet of the future would just destroy it again. Sighing softly, the doctor ran his hands down his face, drawing in a shuddered breath as he all but forced himself to let go of his piqued temper, his hurt pride, because he had to admit some of his ire was because they had interfered with his actions, something he never really enjoyed. Instead, he turned his attentions to what, if anything, had troubled him more than ever than the fate of the colony. The fate of the other doctor. A perusal of the files he borrowed from the Relativity's computer systems confirmed as much of what Duquesne said. These agents had devoted a rather flattering amount of resources to tracking him, the other him, down, traveling to points in time and space where the mysterious doctor had said to make an appearance. But every attempt had been a failure, with the catastrophe in question either have been inverted by some other means, or in some cases the catastrophes simply never have happened. So many incidents that on the Enterprise D's computer had been claimed as fact had, by the 29th century, have been completely debunked. Indeed, a poor bloke named Gary 7 in the late 1960s had been accosted by these wankers for just that reason, which would have made it the second time he's crashed into humanity's future. He had apparently hospitalized 2 time agents before everything was settled. Perhaps one could have explained the lack of solid doctor encounters as time being rewritten at some point, these disasters erased by a madman in a box. But if that were the case, why do these reports still persist? It was as if the stories simply came from nowhere. The doctor did notice, however, that at the time of his meeting with the Relativity, there was still a little over 100 years of 100 rumored incidents still unexplored. Head tilting, he started to scroll through them slowly, stopping about halfway down at one particular incident that leapt out at him. "Oh, hello there, gorgeous," he muttered, licking his lips as he found a rather tasty-looking historical morsel. A police report. The testimony of some man deemed drug-addled by the authorities. This man's testimony spoke of lizard people, of ray guns, of a mysterious item that could very well be a doomsday weapon capable of killing all humans on the planet. Definitely sounds like something the doctor would be interested in. In fact, it all sounded a little like the Silurians, which would have made this the only reference he found to the reptilian pre-human inhabitants of Earth, for that matter. It was a slim thread, granted, but maybe the report had interested the other doctor as well, because apparently someone had come, saved the planet with advanced technology, and promptly vanished without another word. A pair, actually. A man and a woman. Grinning with delight, the doctor quickly keyed in the set of space-time coordinates and spurred the TARDIS into motion, the Time Rotor's gears grinding, beginning to increase in speed as it careened through the vortex. When he stepped out into the crisp air of nighttime Detroit at the beginning of the 21st century, the doctor gave a reflexive cough. After having spent the last little while on utterly clean, hygienic starships, the taste of air pollution was both uncomfortable, yet welcomingly familiar. The streets were all but deserted at this time of night, populated by aging, silent warehouses and crumbling apartment complexes. As he adjusted his bow tie, he couldn't help but let out a little smile across his face. "Much better," the doctor muttered, tugging at his jacket and glancing at his watch to confirm the time. "At least this 21st century Earth doesn't look too different from mine. Now then, where's that warehouse?" He had left himself a couple of hours' worth of leeway to investigate the supposed incident, considering he honestly wasn't certain where to look first. He had parked the TARDIS about a block and a half away from the location that the police had nabbed their eventual confessor, some drug-abusing bloke named Loomis. From what the police report had told him, this man had kidnapped several people and strapped them to tables in an abandoned warehouse, all apparently at the behest of these aliens. He had been found unconscious in a stolen car the morning after, and had been promptly charged with a really impressive list of crimes. Anyway, first step was to track down where he needed to be, assuming this was it wasn't just some drug addict's fever dream. Turning in a quick circle, the doctor's sonic screwdriver buzzed as he ran a quick scan of any nearby non-terrestrial technology, giving a satisfied little hum when he studied the results. Much to his delight, there were several readings indicating non-terrestrial technology in the very same warehouse this druggie was destined to be found in. "There we are," the doctor muttered, satisfaction written all over his face as he set back at a brisk pace, pausing occasionally to scan again. The readings were concentrated in one warehouse in particular, and he drew nearer. The doctor began to pick up other life signs. Several of them were human. 3 were decidedly not. There were several entrances, most of them boarded up. A small device was affixed to the doorway of one of the entrances that hadn't been. It was clearly a scanner that would alert the occupants if anyone entered. A quick buzz with his screwdriver disrupted it long enough to allow him undetected entry, at which point the doctor decided it was time to prioritize, as he was curious as he was to meet these aliens. He had to make sure the humans weren't in any immediate danger. He found the humans soon enough, over half a dozen of them lying unconscious in a single room with IVs strapped to their arms. Moving quietly and carefully, the doctor paused just long enough to scan the area. The alien life forms were close, but not too close. Before he moved on to the next human, a young woman, checking her pulse with 2 fingers, he pried an eyelid open, peered into her sightless gaze for a moment, and then finally passed his screwdriver over her, frowning as he examined the readings. "All right, let's give you a nice checkup." The doctor frowned a little before giving a satisfied grunt, patting her eyelid on the arm as he spoke, quite pointlessly, to her unconscious form. "Sedated. Nothing serious. You'll be fine when you wake up. But what were you doing here in the first place?" The sound of approaching footsteps filling the air, the Time Lord's eyes widened, head swiveling from one side then to the other as he looked for somewhere to hide. In the end, he had to settle for pressing himself into a shadowy nook underneath a nearby metal stairway, crouching beneath a small stack of boxes and holding his breath. Footsteps. Big, heavy, and then the faint sound of a door swinging open. Though the Time Lord was very, very tempted to peek out and see what was happening, he decided, for once, to show an element of patience, ears straining to catch any possible detail. As it turned out, whoever was out there, they didn't give much consideration for secrecy, for one spoke up rather gruffly. 15 militaries from the new arrival. Some more sounds, shifting, rustling, and then the footsteps were receding, back towards the exit. As soon as he heard the doors swing open and shut, the Time Lord was on the move, slipping out from cover. At first his eyes were locked on the doors, but as he started to cross the room, a flicker of movement caught his eyes, his head whipping towards the source. Strange, he muttered, frowning. He thought one of the humans, a male, had moved, but when he glanced back, the man was still laying there, eyes closed. The doctor's eyes flickered for a moment at the door, and then to the human, and then he considered subjecting the man to a scan as well. He realized that he had more pressing concerns right now, such as the mysterious aliens and their equally mysterious agenda. Could they be Silurians? Was another doctor about to arrive and save the day? Moving quickly, the doctor stepped out into the hall, faint voices to the left of him moving towards the source. Keeping in a low crouch, the sonic screwdriver out, he was perhaps halfway there when he suddenly heard footsteps closing in from behind. Whirling around, the doctor pointed his sonic forward, leaning back when he realized that he was staring down the barrel of a silver weapon of some kind. It was the human male, who was decidedly not sedated and pointing some extremely non-terrestrial technology back at him. Well, perhaps not non-terrestrial, but certainly nothing fitting the time period. As the doctor's eyes fitted from the weapon to the man's face, he realized something odd. This human didn't have the confused, twitchy expression of a man who had just woken up with no knowledge of where he is. On the contrary, the doctor suspected that this human knew exactly what he was doing. "Hold it right there," the human growled, keeping the cautious silvery weapon raised as he squinted at the decidedly non-human screwdriver clutched in the Time Lord's grip. "Who are you? Did Daniel send you? Are you working with the Xindi?" "Daniels?" the doctor echoed, keeping his voice down but not lowering his sonic, although he wasn't certain entirely what he intended to do with it. The weapon in the man's hands didn't look as compact or advanced as those on the Reptilian security force. In fact, it looked even bulkier than those of Kirk's Enterprise. "Don't know any Daniels. And Xindi? What the bloody hell's a Xindi?" The human seemed to pause at that, dark eyes narrowing a little as the weapon wavered, just for a moment. The two began to circle each other slowly, hands still raised, until they each had their backs to the corridor wall, feeling marginally more secure. "You never heard of the Xindi?" the human echoed, sounding almost incredulous. "No," the doctor snapped. He was starting to get seriously tired of people pointing guns at him. "I only got as far as a W on the anthropological database. I only had a couple of days to poke through it. So I ask again, what is a Xin?" A sudden high-pitched whine filled the air as a bright energy bolt passed between the two men, striking the far wall with an explosion of sparks. The doctor and the human both dove in opposite directions, taking cover behind two sets of heavy crates before peering through the corners warily. Another blinding flash sent them scurrying back behind their various points of cover, but in the brief view, the Time Lord had caught the briefest glimpse of reptilian creatures moving across the room. Pressing himself against the crates, the doctor drew a deep breath, rolling his eyes as he called to the human. "I take it those are the Xindi?" "Yeah, that's pretty much a safe bet," the human snapped, peering around the corner and firing blasts from his phase pistol. "Look, if Daniels didn't send you here to help, then what the hell are you doing here? Who sent you? Whose side are you on?" "Now?" the doctor exclaimed, ducking further behind the wall as another energy blast sent a fresh shower of sparks. "You want to interrogate me now?" "Well, seems like to be as good a time as any," the human bellowed, firing another quick pair of shots across the complex. "I've got enough enemies to deal with as is, without turning my back on another." "Well, here's a thought," the doctor bellowed right back. "The ones trying to shoot you? Definitely the enemies. Let's give everyone who isn't shooting you the benefit of the doubt." "Oh, sod this." With that, the Time Lord all but vaulted over the cover he had made for himself, stalking grimly down the hall. As the Zindi popped out, weapons raised, the doctor lifted his sonic and emitted a sharp, high-pitched buzzing, causing the alien's weapon to explode in a shower of sparks. Cursing, the reptilian dropped the weapon and tried to fall back, only to get drilled with a fatal blast from the human's weapon. The second and third alien were already in full retreat, and as the doctor's arm snapped out, and a second weapon was disabled, but they vanished from sight a moment later. Dropping to one knee beside the fallen reptilian, the doctor passed over a quick wave of him. A glance at the readout elicited a sigh from him. Not Silurian, clearly, and worse, dead. The human, meanwhile, had sprinted past him down the hall, and it was with several irritated mutters that the Time Lord took off in pursuit. They soon came to a wide room, the far side of which was flanked by several makeshift lights, and in the center which was placed a piece of decidedly non-terrestrial technology. A nearby door was hung ajar. The human examined the device for a brief moment, and then began to look increasingly agitated as he couldn't find what he wanted. "You let them get away!" the human snapped, hauling a small device and flipping it open with a chirp. "T'Pol, they're heading out the west door. They've got the virus." Yes, we're not all quite as gung-ho about murder," the doctor snapped back, scowling as he gave the large alien machine a cursory examination. I've seen enough of those weapons to know you've got there by now to know there's a stun setting. You ever considered using it? "You don't get it," shoving the Time Lord not too gently aside. The human was already gone through the door, calling back as he ran down the corridor. "That biotoxin they're carrying is enough to wipe out half of Earth's population." Rock was one of the finest warriors the reptilians had to offer. A brilliant tactician, as well as among the most physically powerful. It was for this very reason that he had been chosen for this most critical of missions, and he was well aware that its success could very well secure the safety of their entire people. So it was hardly a surprise when the sudden turn of events, with the intrusion of a human and a simian creature in a bow tie that smelled nothing like a proper human, had him already thinking of alternatives. His comrade Rook and he quickly sprinted down a dank hallway, seeking freedom, or at least enough breathing room to find a proper place for an ambush. But it turned out that they were the ones to be ambushed, for as they burst through the alleyway, a car parked nearby gave a sudden honk, a woman's voice rising in protest. Snarling, Rock opened fire with his weapon, and though neither could see in the dark interior well enough to tell if they secured a hit, the returned fire suggested it hadn't been enough. Rock fell under the onslaught, leaving an only unarmed Rock to carry out the mission. But as the reptilian burst into motion, sprinting down the street, expecting to be shot at any moment, he heard sounds of a struggle coming from inside the car. Perhaps their human collaborator had been captured and was even now trying to slow these pursuers down. Such service would earn him a slightly quicker death, at least. It took some quick thinking and quicker feet, but the Zindi managed to shake his pursuers, for a few moments at least. Climbing onto the roof, panting for breath, the reptilian finally took cover behind an air conditioning duct, clutching the canister of biotoxin to his chest. His weapon had already been disabled by the strange humanoid, and he had no spare. His battle prowess aside, he knew he stood no chance against his pursuers and their own considerable technology. But he still had the temporal beacon, his only means back to his own time period. And the virus, while not entirely complete, could still land a devastating blow on the simian human scum. Perhaps it would be better to take his winnings and leave, as it were. Setting the canister down for a moment, Rock tugged the beacon of his belt and began to fiddle with it, seeking extraction quickly before the humans. A low whirl filled the air, and the beacon suddenly erupted into a shower of sparks. Snarling, Rock instinctively dropped the device and whirled in a complete circle. He didn't see anybody, at least not until a low whistle caused him to glance atop a nearby alcove that housed access to the stairway, on top of which the strange-smelling human sat, waving a hand slightly. "Sorry," the odd man chirped. "That just seemed really important, though. So I thought, better break it." His hands popped from behind his back, a long metallic canister held in them. It wasn't until Rock had looked down at his feet and he realized the stranger had stolen the virus while his back was turned. For that matter, I'm guessing you don't want this smashed either. Just yet, anyway. So I'd be nice and quiet if you want to survive. With a growl, the Zindi lunged, starting to climb onto the alcove in pursuit. Oh, wait, you wanted to break it. The doctor's other hand snapped, the sonic screwdriver humming to life, and then rising to an abrupt squeal. For Rock, there was only pain. Pure, blinding pain, as the sound seemed to cut right through his mind, sending every sense into a cacophony of agony. Clutching both sides of his head, the Zindi staggered and dropped to one knee, drawing in a deep, ragged breath, but refusing to voice his discomfort so much as a grunt. Sorry, the doctor shouted. It could only be heard over the sound, wincing as he hopped off the stairwell, keeping the wand raised as he drew closer. I know it's uncomfortable, but you're not giving me much of a choice here. Why don't you just... Rock was a warrior without equal, bred and trained for battle. Though the pain was overwhelming, the reptilian marshaled his inner reserves of strength, and then, with a savage roar, lunged forward all at once. A scaled hand lashed out in a backhand. The silvery wand was not clear of the doctor's hand, skittering across the rooftop, even as the reptilian's other hand lashed out, grabbing the scrawny man by the throat. The sonic squeal died the moment the stranger was disarmed, and it was with a growl of pleasure that the Zindi lifted him with just a single arm, hauling the doctor into the air until his toes dangled just above the ground. Wait, the doctor croaked, both hands clutching the arm that was choking him. You sure you don't want to discuss this for a moment? A sudden arc of phaser fire came out of nowhere, catching the reptilian square between the shoulder blades. Arms flying wide, the Zindi staggered around, groaned, and toppled forward, breath rattled in his chest at the very last thing he saw was the mysterious man in the bow tie, scowling his killers. Are you all right? The human male asked as he jogged over, a stern-looking woman in tow, but the doctor was too busy feeling righteous at the moment to notice. I had the situation perfectly under control! The doctor snapped at the new arrivals as he rubbed his neck gently, catching them both a little off guard and making them very uncomfortable, as one of the arms he was just waving had the silver container of potential civilization-ending biotoxin clutched in it. And for the second time, have you lot never considered using the sorting stun function? What? The human's eyes flickered, quite nervously, to the container under the Time Lord's arm. Stun doesn't work on them. We've tried before. They just shrug it off. Oh. That seemed to mollify the doctor, at least a little, but then he just straightened up a bit, with a voice so stern. Well, you need to find a better stun setting in the future. Thank you for stopping the choking. Any time. Inching forward just a little, the human's eyes didn't drift from the container. I don't suppose you could put that down? The odd man glanced at the container, then waved his hand distractingly. This is the virus you mentioned, then? Don't fret. They didn't remove the container. This is just the external shielding. Durasteel containment pod. Remarkably tough. I could throw this off the building and the interior contents would be just fine. Not a scratch on them. Not that I'm going to, mind you. The doctor added hastily, as his assurance would only seem to alarm the pair considerably, causing them to take half a step closer with weapons raised. So be much obliged if you just lower the weapons, and please stop looking like you're waiting to tackle me around the knees. You want the container? Here, you can hold on to it if it makes you feel any better. The mayor all but snatched the virus pod away when he was offered, grimacing a little as he handed it to the woman. There, all better? The Time Lord beamed. Now who are you lot? Not those buggers from the relativity note, are you? The human looked, if anything, more confused. I'm Jonathan Archer. This is to Paul. Right, the one you warned about the Zindi. The doctor paused, blinking at the woman. Her hair had done a remarkable job of hiding those pointed ears, so much so that he hadn't even realized she wasn't human. To Paul? That's a Vulcan name, that. Vulcan! I love Vulcans. Extremely bright bunch, terrible comedians, but quick as a collection of whips tied together to make some sort of super whip. Since when have Vulcans been capable of time travel? The woman's eyes flickered as she replied, that is to say, What she means to say, Archer replied, deadpanned, extending a hand in a solemn gesture of their surroundings, is that the Vulcan Science Directorate has deemed that time travel is impossible. Well, all right, the doctor amended. They'll eventually become a bright bunch, but seriously, impossible? That would put you lot as early as 22nd century? Oh, hell, Jonathan Archer? See, something about the names combined with the time period had triggered a recollection in his studies in Starfleet's history. Archer's eyes flickered towards T'Pol before he looked back at the doctor. Yes. After a long, disbelieving pause, the doctor's arm sprang up as he turned around, marching off in the direction, rambling as he started to climb off the roof, the other pair apparently forgotten. Can't bloody well swing my arms without hitting captains of the Enterprise. Enterprise this, Enterprise that. Not there weren't another 1,000 ships in sodding Starfleet in over 200 years stretched to Picard. Why didn't they ever stumble on anything remotely interesting in their journeys? Or were they all polluted by the laziest layabouts the human race could squeeze into a bloody uniform for? Considering they had the virus and the strange man didn't seem a world-ending threat, Archer wasn't entirely certain what to do about him. Or rather, if he should try and stop the man from leaving. As the doctor vanished down in a fire escape, however, the captain sighed and tossed a small box to T'Pol. Tag everything for retrieval, he instructed. I'm just going to see what our new friend is up to. Breaking into a jog, Archer reached the edge of the roof just in time to see the doctor reach the sidewalk, where he immediately began marching away, still waving his arms, still ranting about something or other. Quickly, the human began to take the steps 3 at a time, nearly losing his balance more than once as he sought to catch up with the meandering man. Reaching the street just a minute later, he took off in a full sprint. As he neared a street corner, he could hear the most peculiar grinding noise. But it wasn't until he rounded the corner that he saw the source. It was a police box. A disappearing police box. Even for someone who had just saved the Earth, past and present, from reptilian aliens, thanks to the enigmatic 31st century time traveler and a rambling man in a bow tie, that was just a little too weird. So, bereft of alternatives, Archer said the only thing that seemed to fit. Huh. Well, that was disappointing, the doctor muttered as he hopped up the TARDIS control console, sighing softly as he tugged on one of the monitors over. I come looking for the doctor, I end up finding a captain. Again. I mean, what are the odds that I just happen to end up colliding with another bloody Enterprise bunch? This pair seemed to be grumpier than the rest, at that, which is saying something when you consider the permanent frown on Commander Spock's face. More troubling, however, was Archer's reference to Daniels, presumably the fellow who was responsible for sending the pair of them back in time, which meant it was probably the same faction that was so determined to slap on a leash on the doctor. Setting a quick course towards the dawn of life on Earth, figuring it was a good place as any to hide out until he made his next move, the doctor turned his attention back to the monitor, fingers drumming on the console as he skimmed the remaining files. Nothing leapt out at him, however. After a few frustrating minutes, he slammed his hand down hard on the monitor, starting to pace. Damn it. All right, Doctor, think. There's a reasonably perfect, sane explanation for this. Lips curling up as he tried to fend off what he realized was a rising sense of panic. Come on. Maybe there's nobody named the Doctor here. That Gary 7 lad, his servo was loads like a sonic screwdriver. No, he wasn't a time traveler. Unless he was lying. But he's registered as a human. Chameleon Arch? Ridiculous. Think! Then he froze in place, a little nugget of information tugging at him. All right, the doctor murmured, cracking his fingers and giving them a quick wiggle as he peered at the monitor. Different tactic, then. Don't look for mysteries that haven't been solved. Look for mysteries that were solved with a different answer. Speaking of Archer, where? Ah! Time ship, advanced technology, bigger on the inside, and gotcha! Filled with new energy and determination, the doctor quickly entered a new set of coordinates, even as he muttered, I suppose I'm doomed to deal with every Enterprise.